Video games are naturally divided into different genres, and you could easily tell me the difference between a pure puzzle or a horror game. However, if I asked you to describe to me a Hideo Kojima game, you could probably also do it. Depending on your cultural touchstones, you could do the same for Sam Barlow, Fumito Ueda, or Tim Schafer. Directors are one cog in the great machinery of game development, but they can effectively move things into something that feels more like a distinct genre. When directors become synonymous with their works, it creates this effect beyond just seeing them as good at their jobs. When Hidetaka Miyazaki directed Demon Souls and then Dark Souls, the From Software dev team effectively created a whole new genre. However, looking at the creative choices and the lead up to the creation of the Souls-like, it often gets reduced just to Miyazaki. Miyazaki's approach to difficulty, his sense of humour, or his love of poison swamp levels. Reducing a whole team down to a single director, the author of the piece, an auteur of game design. But is that a fair thing to do? Are auteurs in the game industry a real thing, and do directors actually have that much power? Auteurs cast a long shadow over films and other media, as an idea coined back in the 60s by Andrew Saris. An auteur is someone who might be considered an author of a film. Saris's theory goes further, however, and establishes the three main criteria necessary for a director to reach the lofty heights of auteurdom. These are technical competence, distinguishable personal style, and interior meaning. When you apply this theory to video games, the results are similar. For a game director to be an auteur, the game must be well executed. It must incorporate compelling, repeatable design elements, and there must be a higher artistic meaning behind the body of work, or at least recognisable motifs. Auteur theory already fumbled in film studies because there are so many overlapping creative voices that it's hard to say any of them are particularly overwhelming on a project. George Lucas might have directed the first Star Wars movie, but his style was elaborated and improved in The Empire Strikes Back, which was directed by Irvin Kershner, and it's well known that Lucas's editor, Marcia Lucas, was just as important to the visual style of the original trilogy. Other well-known film auteurs like Stanley Kubrick or Wes Anderson have stronger claims to fame for having well-known and instantly recognisable styles, but are still reliant on the performance of their actors and the power of their artists and screenwriters. Game development is even more of a collaborative sport than filmmaking, especially when you take the sheer number of people involved in a AAA game. Taking the singular position of director and raising them is much like the great person theory of history, trying to claim that things are not a result of 1,000 smaller impetuses, but instead the willpower of the noble few, is a short-sighted view of the world, and erases the fact that it's a collective action that builds these great titles, not egotistical super beings with the power to will art into existence. Tetsuya Nomura might be at the heart of the Kingdom Hearts series, but it was a team of writers with Kazushige Nojima, Jun Akiyama, and Daisuke Watanabe that set the basis for the beloved, if convoluted, story. By Kingdom Hearts 3, Nomura might have had a stronger hand in the writing, but now he is a co-director in Tai Yasue, and still has writing assistance from Masaru Oka. Nomura's personal style is infused in all his games, though that style is admittedly overcomplicated shonen melodrama, which is, even if I'm being charitable, not for everyone. Still, it is meaningfully distinctive, and that's a worthy achievement in and of itself. The most obvious candidate for video game auteurship is Hideo Kojima, who established his cinematic style in the Metal Gear Solid franchise, and always wanted to have something to say in the underpinnings of his work. It could be about generational change, cultural propagation, or how perspectives are lost when people die, but there was a definite interior meaning to his work. When Kojima Productions launched, it brought Death Stranding into the world, a game that could have only released with the confidence of Kojima's vision. It was a hard sell to the audience, relying on the "it's a game from Kojima" point, considering much of its core gameplay is frustrating on purpose and the story is borderline nonsense. What makes Death Stranding great is the implementation of the strand type structure, and the connection between gameplay and game meaning. I understand that strand type is something of a meme, but it does mean something. The lonely parts of Death Stranding are intentionally designed to be a slog where everything you can interact with is hostile, including the terrain. When you make connections with other players, set up those strands, the game changes. You can pick up a mission, look at your route, and realise you can set up one zipline to enter a whole chain of them to make travel a breeze. That's the result of the artistic vision meeting with game design, the idea that we're all connected by strands, even in strange ways. However, even with this vision, Kojima still had assisting writers in Kenji Yano and Shuyo Murata to help things land. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach was nominated for Best Game Direction at the 2025 Game Awards, but as much as he takes the top spot for written, directed, and game designed by, Kojima had plenty of people as art directors and writers that the game couldn't exist without. If we do want to refine game development down to the flares and flourishes, those moments that make players go, "no one but Kojima could make this," where's the line? Who is an auteur and who is merely a director? Split Fiction was also up for Best Game Direction at Jazzy Jeff's Jamboree, and its director Joseph Fares also directed Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, A Way Out, and It Takes Two. Two of those are well regarded, with It Takes Two taking Game of the Year in 2021, and Brothers being a coveted indie darling. Can we class Fares as an auteur, considering there is a definite through line of gameplay commenting on connections between people? We could also potentially bestow the auteur label to Masahiro Sakurai, as his directorial style clearly spills over from his work from Super Smash Bros. Into Kirby Air Riders. There's consistency in that fast-paced party-style gameplay, and an insistence on shouting unlocks and successes at you. However, Sakurai's games don't usually have much visual style beyond Kirby being cute, and don't always have something substantial to say. We could also look at Amy Hennig, creative director and writer on the first 3 Uncharted games and the Legacy of Kain series. Would she need a more distinct style and a larger body of work, despite Uncharted's success and clear push for the more cinematic approach in action-adventure games? Few people are clamouring to recognise Hennig for her work, but games like Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls are distinctly offered as David Cage games, even though he's only made 4 games in that distinct style, and most of them are terrible. 2 of the nominees for Best Game Direction in 2025 didn't even list their directors in the credits. Hades 2 just has Supergiant Games creative director Greg Kasavin down as a writer, and Ghost of Yote's creative directors Nate Fox and Jason Connell are folded into design. Despite being up against Jeff Keighley's best friend Kojima for Best Direction, these credits are almost anti-auteur in meaning, folding in the direction effort with equal pegging as the rest of the team. Auteur theory is almost a debunked myth in any case, and while we can celebrate the creative vision of those like Yoko Taro, whose touchstones for style are hot anime women going through existential crises, there's no need to put these directors on a pedestal at the top of the creator hierarchy. Auteur theory was an attempt in cinema to try and find a singular creator to attach the same level of power and mystique as an author, musician, or painter. The old art forms allowed people to truly revere an artist, someone who had complete control over their works. People want a figure to celebrate or revile for their output, and a whole group doesn't capture the imagination in quite the same way. However, it is untrue in game development, as it was untrue in cinema, where cinematographers, actors, and endless crew members made collective visions come to life. It wasn't even that true about literary authors either, who were also augmented by their editors. In indies that might be attributed to one person, there are still others that helped. Undertale is by Toby Fox, but Temi Chang appears in the credits 5 times, and rightly so. Game development is a collaborative effort. It can't be anything else. A director might steer, but they'd never be able to sail by themselves. Each worker is an important part of the group, and it is together that they should be acknowledged, not as an easily identifiable auteur. No game is an island, and no developer is a god.